This church tower in southwest Scotland was built in 1779. The church's first minister, the Reverend Bryce Johnston, reported the two bells in the belfry came from a medieval church that once shared the same site. The site of the original medieval church is now a graveyard, but when the original church stood, it was the last remnant of an abbey, with a complex of buildings that occupied the whole site, founded and built in the mid-part of the 12th century. An abbey of which very little is known, its history largely removed, its early record mostly lost or hidden. We do know its name: Holywood. The former abbey church was understood by parishioners in the 18th century and chronicled by a local historian in the early part of the 19th century to have originally belonged to the Knights Templar, the original church being part of a 12th century Knights Templar Preceptory and infirmary, built at the epicentre of significant Templar holdings and estates in the area. The church's minister, the Reverend Bryce Johnston, around 1790, reported he had an engraving with a name matching the name engraved on one of the bells in his new church, citing the bell's sponsor to be head of the Holywood convent, together with the date of 1154, which led him to the conclusion the bell was probably consecrated at that time, that is, in the abbey's founding years, making the bell the oldest datable bell in the UK. Hanging beside the bell engraved with the name of the head of the Holywood convent is another bell of a confirmed pre-13th or 12th century design, known amongst bell historians as long or high-waisted, an older design than the bell dated 1154 by the Reverend Bryce Johnston. This bell is engraved with the sponsor's initials and his armorial, initials that match the name on the other engraved bell. This older style bell was clearly not created at the same time as the other bell or by the same bell maker, but nevertheless the bells could have only been created within a few years of each other, that is, in the mid-part of the 12th century, making these bells the original bells from the founding of Holywood Abbey, the oldest pairing of bells in the world. Although most of this testimony is to be found in the highly regarded 18th and 19th century statistical accounts of Scotland, and in the local museum, none of it forms the academic understanding or the officially accepted historical record of the Holywood site. This is not because the original information was bogus or judged unreliable, but because it had been overlooked by antiquarians writing about the site in the early part of the 20th century. Instead, these early 20th century historians did not seek out the complete record of the Holywood site, but relied instead on cherry-picked Victorian theory contained within selective publication from their own historical societies. Publication and theory which misled due to the limits of Victorian understanding. Theory which relied on contrivance and invention rather than research. And Victorian publication which mistakenly cited both the tower bells as 16th century, grossly misinterpreting the bell's engraving and the true bell's sponsor's title on medieval record. And publication which misled the nature of the site's occupants, deeming them unknown until 1225. All of this Victorian narrative was based on superficial assumption, rather than objective research and evidence, and so, not surprisingly, is incorrect. So in 2020, with such a disparity of former opinion presented over a period of over 200 years, an audit of all the available information was carried out, something that should have occurred a long time ago. The audit was coupled to a collaborative, forensic and objective examination of the bell's inscriptions, underwritten by the new owners of the church, my wife and I. It was the first time the bells had been comprehensively studied rather than superficially inspected. My wife, affectionately called Digger, is a qualified forensic archaeologist. And I am a practiced historian, not an academic, but someone who has serviced the history market for over 50 years. Activity which involves rigorous research for historical representations of military personnel and equipment, presentations rendered in bronze and pewter, work that still graces the collections of finicky military and historical collectors, medieval reenactors, and international museums. More recently, in a change of direction, I channeled that research and quest for accuracy into creating insightful medieval historical fiction. My wife and I are or have been professional analysts, and it was as analysts rather than historians that we set out to understand the site's heritage and the history of the bells, so any conservation plan for the church, its tower and its bells was appropriate to the understanding of the site. The collaborative research employed experts and scholarly work from all over the world. The investigation was challenged, reviewed and tested by academia until only one evidenced and supportable conclusion could be made. Hello, welcome to Holywood Church in southwest Scotland. I present to you a series of videos that chart the ongoing misadventure of two people, leading to one of the most significant provenance medieval discoveries ever made in the world, and certainly in Scotland. The only significant provenance Knights Templar artefacts so far found. And in turn, we present an appalling scandal, as Scottish public institutions and academia deliberately reject the truth and the public to defend its own shortcomings and failure. It's a discovery you will not have heard about. Not because of the absence of truth in the discovery, far from it, but because of the absence of merit and the overwhelming presence of prejudice in history-centred institutions, both public and academic. I present the story in the existence of a former 12th century Scottish Knights Templar Preceptory, the remnants of its decorative stone and its church bells, sponsored by an early Scottish Templar master, still existing today in my wife and I's care. The bells are the only significant provenance Knights Templar artefacts so far found in the world, and are therefore unique and priceless. This is Holywood Church, a former place of Christian worship situated just outside of Dumfries in southwest Scotland, an area known in medieval times as Nithsdale. The church was built by the Presbyterian congregation in 1779 to replace an older mid-12th century built church constructed in the Norman style that once was part of an abbey complex standing on the same site. The abbey was dismantled after the 16th century Scottish religious reformation, with only part of the original abbey church allowed to stand to serve the Holywood parish, taught under a new state-approved Calvinist doctrine. The last remnants of the abbey church were demolished in the 18th century, the builder paying £50 for the remaining rescued stone, which would be around £10,000 in today's money, an indication perhaps of how much stone was recovered and the size of the demolition of the former church. The Georgian builder levelled the site with earth taken from the surrounding area, a significant exercise, covering the abbey's subterranean basements and vaults together with their contents, and built the church and a new graveyard over the site. The new Holywood Church took the bells from the old church and placed them in a new belfry, not the one perhaps you see today on top of the tower, because it is reported the tower was enhanced in the 19th century with a new belfry, illustrated by the addition of better quality dressed stone. The rescued decorative stone, the stone not recycled, taken from the original demolished church, was buried under the new church, leaving the original basements from the abbey and abbey complex intact and undisturbed. Later, unsuspecting Victorian gravediggers would find these basements, long after the original church and its basements were forgotten. So dangerous was Victorian grave excavation in some areas of the site that a rope was often tied to gravediggers as they tentatively broke the ground. In the course of finding voids filled with buckets of redeposited bones of the departed lifted from the site during the 18th century construction, metal objects including weapons, decorative stone and artefacts were found. Some were left, some were removed, and either kept by the gravediggers or passed on to others. The current church served the local parish for around 220 years, until a fall in congregation and a lack of dedicated ministry meant the church closed for worship at the end of the last century. The closure of Holywood Church ended a 5,000-year spiritual history of the site, evidenced by mainland Scotland's largest standing stone circle, a mere quarter-mile from the church, called the 12 Apostles, although it only consists of 11 stones. If you want to know more about the stone circle, I've included a link in the description to the YouTuber Before Caledonia and his video created in 2020. Between Holywood Church and the 12 Apostles are two 5,000-year-old earthworks associated with pagan ritual, again supporting the spiritual importance of the site. Holywood experienced continuous spiritual worship right up to an earnest Christian presence spanning from the 6th century onwards. This included the presence from the 8th up to the 12th century of the autonomous ascetic culdees with their Celtic rite. The ancient Celtic Christian church in Holywood yielded to the Roman Church in the 12th century, which itself surrendered to Protestant Reformation and a Calvinist doctrine in the 16th, lasting until the end of the 20th century, with atheism for the first time in Scotland's history dominating Scotland's society and culture. Holywood, or Sacred Mor in Latin, is also known as de Congal. Der is the Celtic expression for oakwood, and Congal after St. Convalus or St. Congal, who was an early Celtic Christian spiritual leader associated with the site in the reign of King Malcolm II in the early part of the 11th century, supporting the likely existence of a monastic house on the site prior to a Norman-style church being built in the mid-part of the 12th century. Unfortunately, Holywood Church shares the same fate as a great number of other churches in Scotland, as secular ideology and religious indifference replaces a once fervent Christian belief. Thus, a temple in the middle of a once important agricultural parish in Scotland became an unwanted structure in the middle of a graveyard to be sold off at a bargain price to a developer to make what would always be an expensive and compromised dwelling amongst the dead and buried. At the time of closure, Holywood Church, last refurbished in 1965, required a significant amount of repair and maintenance. New roof coverings and repairs throughout, new guttering, water and drainage service installation to a building that had no water service installed since it was built 250 years ago. Complete rewiring. A significant amount of wall stabilization and strengthening, stone repairs and pointing, and refurbishment of the two church bells, work identified in 1996 and still outstanding. These were just a few items on a significant list of must-dos. Must-dos even before any conversion could take place to give the church a new life. As a redundant place of worship and with no community use, the church was disposed of by the Church of Scotland to a local house developer in 2010 for around £35,000. The developer drew together an architectural and archaeological conservation plan. He then obtained planning permission from the local authority for the church to be converted into a house, which was granted around 2014. However, before the developer could start the work, repeated incidences of vandalism meant the developer had to move onto the site to ensure the building's safety. Regrettably, not before two valuable stained glass windows were broken, the church broken into, with several damaged doors and windows damaged beyond rescue. There was theft and more petty vandalism. After planning permissions were obtained in 2014, some 4 years after purchase, refurbishment of the church commenced, with the last developer. But it languished. Little work was carried out beyond part stripping the water-damaged Victorian installed plaster and latch on the church hall, revealing the original Georgian plastered and painted walls beneath. Some of the ecclesiastical fittings were removed, and the installation of replacement and external doors and a few windows were carried out. Previous blocked openings were exposed, and the pews were removed. The interior is to become unrecognisable from the church as it was. Years passed, and the developer's home plans for the church diminished due to what was claimed to be a change in personal reasons and circumstances, resulting in the developer offering the building for sale, still undeveloped, now part stripped of its decor and furnishings, and very much dilapidated, both inside and out. My wife and I bought the church off the previous developer at the end of 2019. Our purchase of the church as a potential home was constrained by our own economic realities. We could not obtain a mortgage, but we had savings enough to buy the church and income enough to carry out the refurbishment of the church on a rolling programme. It was envisaged we would have a livable home space within 18 months, with completion of the refurbishment within 3 years. Not ideal, but still, it was a purchase of the heart. We, like the developer before us, aimed to make the redundant church a home for our young family. And like the last developer, we wanted to conserve its antiquity and ensure its now silent church bells were at least not lost to public viewing. The church was not ideal, but it suited our needs. Not so much for its location or its appearance or even its practicality, as it had no outside space of its own, but because it already had planning permission, with all that costly architectural and archaeological consideration, together with a full building survey and a conservation proposal already created. Therefore, all the costly, painful and bureaucratic nightmare associated with all historic planning concerns had been borne by the last developer, allowing us to concentrate on conversion, and of course any hidden nightmare conversion would bring. In short, despite a few concerns that were not resolved during our negotiation with the last developer, my wife and I took the building on trust that all had been properly considered. Outside all the work we would have to complete, which was considerable, especially considering how badly maintained the church had been in the last 60 years or so, a new interesting home was envisaged, all for the previous developer's estimated sum of £150,000. However, we were not so naive or inexperienced to accept such a modest refurbishment estimate. And with a guarantee of archaeology likely to be encountered, installing services, and the architect's proposals that were likely to be flawed in the real world of building refurbishment, we added another £200,000 to the budget. We were not looking for a financial investment to resell the property, just a place to be for the rest of our lives. I'm going to break our story at this point, because our story involves a great number of issues, too many for a single video. There is, of course, the discovery of the world's only significant Knights Templar artifacts to come, and that is a huge story. But that's not the whole story. There is much more. As with any Knights Templar tale, you should expect controversy and intrigue, corruption and malevolence, good versus evil, humility versus hypocrisy, and we have it all. A sorry catalogue of misplay and misbehaviour. In the next video, given in the link attached to the description, I will share how the trust we invested in others regarding the purchase of Holywood Church was grossly misplaced, and how a restoration nightmare became a fortuitous discovery of priceless Knights Templar antiquities, only to become another nightmare of intentioned institutional ignorance and bigoted elitism. Please understand why my wife and I are presenting these videos. Why, after 5 years of talking to who should have been the right people, we have had to make these videos as the only way to promote an important, immensely significant and genuine discovery. We are not filmmakers. We are not activists. We're just ordinary people who have made an extraordinary discovery. We're just two people who had the opportunity to focus on the heritage in our possession. And we're in a position to study something thoroughly rather than offer briefly considered superficial opinion. Please understand why we need you. Not simply to watch these videos as a few minutes of distraction on your phone or computer, but to become invested into our story. We desperately need your help, because our history is in peril from a prejudiced, academic-led history and heritage establishment that has become so corrupted from its original noble intention, it no longer adds merit to our impartial understanding of our history. We seem to be in an age governed by an establishment that has fostered stupidity rather than wisdom, indoctrination instead of mentorship to seek objectivity and challenge, malevolence rather than character building, creating imposters where good leadership should be. After 5 years of campaigning, repeatedly petitioning the Scottish Government and pleading with individuals, organisations and institutions that are in a position to help, our legal advisors can only see legal remedy and public outcry as the last remaining route to restore good sense where ignorance and incompetence have previously prevailed. I stress our understanding of the two bells of Holywood and the site is based only on merit and evidence, not supposition, not invention, nor opinion. You can check out this evidence for yourself on the website given in the link to the video's description. Nothing is hidden. All is available to question. We tried crowdfunding in 2023 to help us in campaign and failed because we had neither social media following, active support from the local community, nor funds to promote the campaign. So every penny we can muster from these videos will go into promotion to meet legal costs and security for the bells and the site, while we find new owners better suited to protect Scottish Christian history. So please like and share these videos and subscribe to our channel. Watch the series. Register on our website. Sign our petition. Engage with us if you think you can help or want to help. We want to share this momentous find with as many as we can, and particularly those that can help us bring the discovery to the public. And so, in turn, share in the huge financial reward the discovery will undoubtedly bring. In the meantime, buy me a coffee in the link below, or buy our book given in the link on our website. And I hope I will see you next time.